I think, compared with many other countries, New Zealand is a very, very safe country. And I think Auckland is a very safe city. I've lived in Africa, I've lived in Latin America, I've lived in Asia, and I can say from my own experience that in general, New Zealand is the sort of country that you could send your children to for study, for example, very safely. Auckland is, relative to many cities, I think very safe indeed. I mean, I think there are always times, for example, if you choose to walk down Queen Street at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, that's probably not the best time to see Queen Street. But if you think about most areas of Auckland, people can go to the shops, they can visit their friends, they can move between school and home in perfect safety, and I think that's the norm in New Zealand. We are generally a very safe, secure nation. I think when I say that we're a safe country, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues. I have some figures here that in the last year, assaults have been up 6%, robberies are up 12%, burglaries are up 14% in New Zealand. And if you look at the Auckland figures, assaults are up 11% and burglaries up 6%. So it's not to say we have no problems. I mean, there are issues, and I think it's very important that we tackle those issues, and I have some thoughts about that. But I think you're also right to talk about who is being attacked and who is being robbed. We have no evidence, hard evidence, of racist attacks, but I think there is anecdotal evidence from the communities, from the Indian communities, from the Chinese communities, that suggests sometimes people in those communities have been targeted. And this must be worrying. I mean, this is not a thing we can accept in New Zealand. People who live here of whatever origin must be perfectly safe. I'm sure if you are a member of the Chinese community who has been attacked, you might come to that conclusion, and I would understand that. But I don't think there is evidence. I think that where we see these increases in violence, I suspect they're happening across all communities, and they are all bad. If we find evidence of particular targeting of particular communities, then of course we must act on that, because, as I say, all communities must be safe in New Zealand. I have not found any. I looked, because I was aware of your interest in this. We do not find figures on that. I don't know if they're released, and it's possible that the police do have figures, but we try and avoid in New Zealand profiling people by race, of course. We try not to label people by race or by origin. So I can't speak to those data. I know that the data suggests that there is an increase in violent behaviour, and that we must tackle that, whoever is the victim. I think data is always helpful. I think that one of the things that I believe in is you start from good data. You cannot have good policy without a strong evidence base. And one of the things I do say is that we get better data. If we do not have data, we need data. But I also think we must talk to the communities, because data is always better when we hear from the different communities their experience. And I think that those are the two things we must listen to very carefully. Hard evidence, and also talk to the communities like the Chinese community, like the Indian community, like the Filipino community, to hear what their experience is. And I think those two things go together quite importantly. I understand that it's difficult to prove that this is an effect of age. In other words, the idea that the increase in violence is a result of younger people acting more violently, I understand is difficult to prove. We don't have hard evidence. Again, I think one needs good evidence on this. If it were a particular problem and the evidence showed that, we would have to look at that very seriously. But we will always, certainly from the Labour Party's perspective, we will start from hard evidence, and that's another reason I want to listen to communities. Because if communities think that they are being targeted, and if they think that young people are targeting them, we need to look at the evidence to see whether that is actually the case. If it is the case, then we have to act. Only 6% of burglaries in Auckland are solved. 94% of burglaries are not solved. Now this is a really concerning statistic. In other words, if 94% of reports don't receive a resolution, many people will be disturbed. If you've been robbed, if you've been assaulted or whatever, and there isn't a result, you're going to feel more insecure. You feel the law is not protecting you. And so clearly we have to do better, and the key to this actually is more police. In fact, there are two things. One is more police, and the second thing is probably looking at the distribution of police, thinking about the unstaffed stations, thinking about where we've reduced the presence of the police in the community. Maybe we have to reverse that process, put more police in the community to try and deal with these problems. Now, we know when we are in government next year, we have to do better than this current government. We will go into the election next year with some concrete policies on this. They will be about increasing police numbers. They will be about increasing the presence of police in communities. The current government promised to do more about this. They promised to bring in one police person for every 500 new population. So their ratio was 1 to 500. Well, I've looked at the figures on this. Since 2008, the population of New Zealand has increased by about 274,000 people. Right, so since 2008, the population increase is 274,000. If it was 1 to 500, you'd have over nearly 600 new police, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. In fact, you've only had 274 new police in total since 2008, one for every 1,000 of the new population. Now that's a failure of this government. They promised that they would increase that ratio. They have not delivered that. And in fact, one of the things I've discovered in thinking about this interview is that the police force have had to absorb $300 million worth of extra costs without a budget increase. So their costs have gone up 300 million, but there's been no budget increase. They've had to absorb that as part of the cost-cutting exercise. And I understand that the government's position is they've just produced a strategic plan. There will be a real increase in police numbers only in 2020 in their plan. Now, I find this interesting because the national government is normally the government of law and order. They speak very loudly about this normally. They have failed